One of the things that's so concerning about long-term homeless populations is that these people have been on the streets for so long that the problems that led them to be homeless, mental illness, drug addiction, or whatever, have deteriorated to the point where it's going to take 10x the effort that it would have taken had you had a sensible enforcement regime against these kind of behaviors in the first place. On top of that, homeless people are in fact people. They're human beings, and human beings are nothing if not adaptive to their surroundings. So the other struggle that they have to go through in places like Los Angeles is the fact that these people have adapted to living on the streets in such various different ways that honestly, you're going to be surprised when you look into the way that they're set up, how luxurious they make their accommodations in comparison to what you might think. Again, in comparison, it's not luxurious at all, and how much embedded into the literal infrastructure of the city of Los Angeles some of these people actually are. That's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about somebody who made a home out of a utility door underground and could have potentially caused serious damage to the neighborhood that he was in. But before we get into that, I want to say thank you so much to everyone who signed up over on actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay.
And thank you to my podcast listeners, Spotify, Apple, and Google's podcasting platform.
Now at 3:30, a troubling discovery underscoring the dire homeless situation in Los Angeles. A man living in an underground utility vault in Little Tokyo.
So obviously what we have here is an outlier story. Let me make that clear, but it is indicative of the overall problem that I was referring to in the beginning, in the open of this, which is some of these people have been homeless for such a set period of time that they're finding little quirks. In this case, it's an underground utility vault in order to find some level of shelter to live on the streets. And let's be clear, this is not only dangerous for this person, but for other people in the area, because we don't know exactly how many people are living in these vaults. And this is something that you should definitely look into. And again, this is one of the reasons why rulings like that Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruling, which by the way, I hit hard over and over again on this channel because it's that crucial, that declare that these people have some superior right to camp out on the streets, are so damaging, because when you allow this program to go unchallenged, you end up in situations where these people, again, are losing aspects of who they are as people, and they're more embedded, more entrenched, more used to living on the streets, and it just makes it that much more difficult to get them out of there.
Surveillance video captures a homeless man lifting the lid to an underground utility vault and stuffing a backpack inside.
We take the safety of our employees, of our volunteers, and of our guests very seriously.
So this particular man that is seen in the video is living in this utility thing by a museum, and I want to make something clear, this is not a burglary kind of situation. He found access to one or two of these vaults, so he had some stuff in there, he was living in there, but he did not have the ability nor the capability at any point in time in the future of breaking into the museum that ended up capturing this on film. However, that does not mean that he was not a danger to himself or to potentially others, as we're going to find out throughout the course of this video.
The security guards noticed the incident, called our director of security, who came down.
A short time later, museum security watched as the man opened the lid to another vault and climbed inside. That's when they called police. The vaults typically contain water and natural gas valves, or electrical lines. In this case, LAPD says it was a water meter. Inside the vault, we saw empty food containers and other debris.
So I have two crucial points about this. First and foremost, notice the level of oomph that they had to use in order to lift that vault door. This is a heavy situation. Now, you would be able to lift this up if you're an adult man or a particularly strong woman, or if you were motivated enough to do so. But in this case, which by the way, it could have been a natural gas line or a power line, he was living amongst a water line. If by any circumstances he managed to damage that, or it was damaged in his sleep, or the pipe burst, or the various problems that could occur, or unseasonable rain like we saw earlier in the year in Los Angeles, this could have led to a situation where he could have drowned in there trying to force his way out. out. I need to emphasize over and over again, because a lot of people just don't get it. This is not the more sympathetic view. It's actually incredibly unsympathetic to allow these people to live in such disarray, to live in such horrible conditions that they could end up dying in ways that you could not possibly imagine were even possible. Imagine, again, the water burst. This guy ends up drowning, and then when they go to look at the pipe, they find a dead body in there. Is that something you want to have? Now, he had food containers and a bunch of different things that indicated that he was living there, but he also had an item that is quite questionable that I want to talk about when we get to that portion of the story. But I do want to point out that this individual was not just a little bit out of his mind, he was actually dangerous.
There is no access to the museum from the vaults, but Van Kirk says their close proximity to the building and the presence of people camping inside is a serious fire concern.
There are pipes leading in from utilities into our facility here at Janum.
When officers arrived, they located the man inside one of the vaults. After ordering him to come up, they attempted to search him, LAPD confirming the man became combative and hit one of the officers.
So thankfully, the guy got up on his own accord. He got out of the vault when being ordered to by the Los Angeles police. However, shortly after he was up, when they wanted to search him, which obviously is something you would want to do, he ended up assaulting a police officer. Now, there's no reports of injuries or anything like that. However, I do want to point out that this guy is supporting himself in some way, and we're going to find out a little bit of a hint of it, even though the local news affiliate, for some reason, doesn't understand the significance of the discovery that they found.
He was arrested for trespassing and battery on a police officer.
The individual was taken away in custody. They searched the backpack, and our understanding is they found a firearm or a replica of a firearm.
So since they're not clarifying on whether or not the gun was real, let's go over what could have happened in either scenario. First and foremost, if they open the vault, they order this guy to come out, he is in a defensible position where he could fire up upon the officers. This is incredibly dangerous because the officers may not have known at the time that he wasn't near a gas line, he was actually near a water line, and thus firing back on him or his bullet ricocheting and hitting there could have potentially caused an explosion. Now, let's go with scenario number 2, which is this is a potential replica firearm. Why do you think this guy had a replica firearm that looked real enough in his backpack in this vault? Think about how he's paying for the stuff that he has. Chances are, if you were to run this guy's name or run his description, what you will ultimately end up discovering is that the way that he's financing this is not just through straight up begging, it's actually through armed robbery, or at least the appearance of a replica gun, which to the person that is being robbed or has it pointed at, they wouldn't know the distinction, and thus the charge would be exactly the same. So, this is a scenario where they found somebody who's been homeless for a while, living on the streets for a while, who potentially had a firearm, a danger to himself or others, became physically combative with police officers that should not be on the streets, and declaring that he has a super right to be on the streets, definitely not a good sign. Now, people will tell me some point in the comments, I always see some version of this argument that if you have a mental condition, the chances of you being victimized by a crime are significantly higher than if you did not have that condition. But the thing is, that is an expand the denominator statistical manipulation that we're all too familiar with on this channel. If you're homeless and mentally ill, the chances of you committing a violent crime are significantly higher than if you're mentally ill, but your condition is manageable, like you have anxiety, and you're living in a normal residence, or somebody is caring for you. In fact, according to the National Institute of Health, the overall criminal offenses for somebody who is homeless and mentally ill is 35 times higher in that population versus the domicile population. And that skews towards the violent crime. The rate of violent crime is 40 times higher, and the rate of non-violent crimes is 27 times higher in the homeless population. So again, when you actually zero in on specifically what we're talking about, which of course is homeless people committing crimes, they commit crimes at 35 times the rate, and specifically violent crimes, that is 40 times the rate as somebody suffering from anxiety, depression, whatever, but if they're actually in a living situation that is adequate. So we are allowing people to go out onto the streets, use drugs precipitously, have mental conditions completely untreated, and those mental conditions being untreated in combination with them being on the street, which, by the way, obviously have a bunch of different things that would aggravate a bunch of different various conditions, are leading to higher rates of violent crime. So the more people you have out on the streets, the better chance you're going to have an increase in violent crime overall, which is why, again, it is not sympathetic to let these people live this way. And by the way, this isn't the only dangerous living arrangement that homeless people have had. During the pandemic, when law enforcement had their funding cut and police forces were being drawn back, not just because of the pandemic or because of the funding cuts or because of the George Floyd effect that happened in Los Angeles, but also because you had a bunch of officers calling out sick, we saw very elaborate ways that homeless people were getting power into their encampments.
As LAFD Fire Chief Kristen Crawley told us a couple of months ago that 50% of all fires in the city are caused by people experiencing homelessness, and their call volume has soared.
And unsurprisingly, when your property looks like this, aka the walls being mattresses or cardboards, and you're tapping electrical lines in order to have electricity, which again, I understand the desire for comfort, this led to situations where there were fires, and a lot of these people are living under the bridge or whatever, near critical infrastructure. So now you're having fires mixed in with drugs that are strewn about, mixed in with people who are camping in very unsafe areas, and this, of course, could lead to serious injuries and or deaths. This again is not the sympathetic response to just let this happen. Now, I will give some credit to Mayor Karen Bass, who, by the way, I was very skeptical of when she came into office because she is a left-wing progressive, but she seems to actually take the homeless problem seriously, and although I think there are points where she could do better, credit is deserved where credit is due. So I was at Venice Beach years ago, before all of this, and I saw the homeless encampments, and I have heard and seen images that only show that those encampments were getting worse since I visited back in, 2018, 2019. Who cares about my time there personally? Now, Karen Bass actually took advantage of the unseasonable and unusual rain that was affecting California in the month of January and sent out her homeless outreach people in order to get these people out of the encampments and into hotels, because she's trying to at least get them to a place where they could be managed in a more centralized location. And we have to give credit for that, because one of the things that Los Angeles homeless people take advantage of is the great weather that is available year-round, or at least the enjoyable weather that is available all year round. So when the rains came and that kind of crapped on all these people's shelters, that move was quite intelligent. Now, I'm a big believer, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, that we should just do what we did during World War II when we had people come back specifically to Los Angeles, which is find an area, build those $8,000 Quonset huts, move people to those areas so that way we can sort them out, but at least on a temporary situation, a quick response to circumstances that were unusual. I think this was actually quite innovative and intelligent. She's actually using a bunch of money that apparently in a ballot initiative, because in California, for some ungodly reason, they do everything via ballot initiative, was appropriated towards homeless services to buy out some hotels that were going to be abandoned, keep them open, and keep these people in there so that you could at least begin the process of treating these people. And she actually signed something that at first I thought was really good, but unfortunately it's going to go in the okay category, which was a way to cut through some of the red tape for zoning.
The directive updates the city's zoning code to exempt all affordable housing projects from the costly and time-consuming site plan review process that often adds 6 months to a project's timeline.
We have shortened the processing time from a matter of months to a matter of days.
The existing building code required all housing developments of more than 49 units to undergo the review process, so developers would often avoid building more than 49 units, but not anymore.
In my district, we're about to open a 49-unit permanent supportive housing building. That's great, but it's only 49 units. It could have been 73 units.
Now, according to Los Angeles law, you have to go through a lengthy review if you want to build any apartment building which has affordable housing units over 49 units, and this could actually take months to years, and it ultimately ends up resulting in California, specifically Los Angeles, being one of the major cities where nothing gets built. New York City builds something like twice the number adjusted for population apartment units as Los Angeles, and this is due to the fact that their regulatory regime is just horrible over there. So I give her credit where credit is due for at least cutting through the red tape in some regard, but I will point out that you need to start reducing and cutting out some of these zoning regulations for everyone, because that is the only provable way to decrease the cost of building in Los Angeles. Again, I cite this over and over again, but it needs to be remain clear that Houston, which is on the other extreme, has no zoning regulations. And historically, even though it's one of the fastest growing cities in the entire country, incomes tend to grow faster than housing prices in the city of Houston. And it's not just no zoning regulations in Houston. In Dallas, Fort Worth area, they have very limited zoning regulations, and we see a similar pattern. And again, these are not places that are decreasing in population. These are places that are increasing in population. And this is without all of the affordable housing schemes and concoctions by bureaucrats that are designed to give a cut or a handout to this guy or that guy, that this is possible. And this is something that they really need to look into in Los Angeles. I saw some outrageous number that in LA, something like 75% of all of the houses or all of the areas are zoned for single family dwellings. This is no way to run a major metropolitan area. I hate to break it to you guys, but you're going to need some apartment buildings. Now, I won't come down super hard on Karen Bass because California's regulatory system at the statewide level is actually a huge contributing factor. So I don't know if she can actually do more than this specific thing in order to address the problem. Remember, we actually covered a video, or I've highlighted in the past, an amazing video from Kirk Wilcox on this specific issue in California, specifically referencing CEQA, which is this environmental law that essentially allows any random individual to sue any developer for any reason whatsoever, as long as it's somehow under the guise of environmentalism. You also have open space things. There's a bunch of different ways that California residents can enforce by law these not in my backyard kind of regulations that really need to be trimmed back at the state level in order for us to see a resolution in terms of housing prices overall in California's major metropolitan areas. I will link Kirk's video in the description of this one, but there was one story in particular, which was a developer that wanted to build something like 220 apartments, and then he got sued under CEQA, and then he won the lawsuit. But the problem is that he won after he reduced it from 220 something apartment units to only like 100 or 80 or something like that. And when he eventually won, this developer, it was 22 years later. 22 years later, he was approved to build the apartment. This is no way to run a freaking city at all. Now, I do want to do an overall breakdown of housing first policies because this is what the progressives often bring up in retort to any criticism of enforcement against homeless people. And since technically my Quonset hut idea should fall under the housing first parameters, at least in that regard, I think it's important that we review the overall data because it's not sunshine and rainbows. It's not this magic bullet. And oftentimes it can lead to a net increase in homeless population, even with the examples often cited by progressives as great successes of the program. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't move people, try to figure out what was wrong with those programs into some kind of shelter, and then do something afterwards to kind of head off the negative effects of just focusing on housing. But I do want to break that down in an overall video. I want to talk about it in the future, and I want to give Karen Bass a little bit of credit, a tiny bit of credit, because at least in this regard, she seems to be making moves to get people off the street, which will have better effects on overall criminality and other issues that I care about in terms of what I talk about on this channel. But I want to know what you guys think. Is Los Angeles beyond the point of saving? Have you seen and do you like some of the moves Karen Bass put forward? Do you even want me to do a housing first video reviewing the policy and the literature around it? Let me know all the comments down below. If you like the video, show it by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about what's going on in Los Angeles. Till next time.